All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. And hi, I'm Lori Sabata, the ACUHO-I staff liaison to the Annual Conference Program Committee. I want to thank everyone for joining us and welcome to the webinar on how to submit a program proposal for the 2018 ACUHO-I Annual Conference and Exposition. And before we get too far and say too much, I do want to do a quick tech check. I want to make sure that you can hear my voice and that you can see the screen. You should be seeing the title slide for the webinar, and you should be seeing this little card with some phone numbers on it that's sort of bouncing back and forth there. If you are seeing those things, I'd like to direct your attention to your control panel where you will see a little sort of like a cartoon hand. If you wouldn't mind clicking on that, that lets me know that you can hear me and you can see the screen and that all is well on your end, and it appears that it is because I see some hands raised, so thank you so much for doing that. I did want to mention also that joining me today is the steering committee for the annual conference, as well as Billy Malasso, Director of Research and Education for ACUHO-I. I have the names and titles listed here. I'm not going to read through those, but I'm just going to, each of us are going to share information as a team this afternoon. So I'm going to let each person sort of introduce themselves and talk through their role when it's their turn to present. So we are going to obviously spend some time presenting and showing some things to you. And I also want to mention this is being recorded. So if you have any colleagues who weren't able to join us, we'll have that link available and you'll be able to share that with them later. We will have some time also at the end of the presentation for any questions you might have. So you can go ahead and type those in the chat window. You don't have to wait till the end of the presentation. As soon as you think of a question, go ahead and type it in and we'll take some time to answer those questions at the end of the presentation. So I am going to turn it over to Ray Gasser. Welcome, Ray.
Well, thank you, Lori. I wanted to welcome everyone to this presentation to hopefully help you get some information about your submissions for the annual conference in Denver, July 7th through the 10th. We're really excited to be able to host a diverse array of programs this year, and we're hoping that this session will help you put forward the best possible programs. This year we will have 10 education sessions, so 10 different time slots for those 50-minute sessions. One quick take session, which is a 30-minute presentation. We'll talk a little bit more about these later in the presentation. We have 18 program rooms, 2 of which will be roundtables and 1 which will be the senior leadership track. So in the end, we get each year well over 300 to 400 programs, and we anticipate right now being able to accept about 147. So you being part of this presentation today hopefully gives you an edge to be able to be one of those that are accepted. Our programs are due, our proposals are due Tuesday, December 5th. We're also going to be talking a little bit about pre-conference sessions. We are looking for presenters in 3 specific areas. And we're looking for presenters that come from differing types of institutions to talk about assessment, residential curriculum, and First Amendment / controversial speakers. Those presentations would be either in the morning on Saturday before the conference began, or in the afternoon. So those are 3-hour programs, pre-conferences. And I will end there.
Great. Hi, this is Billy from the central office, and the group asked me if I would spend a couple of seconds talking about the delegate profile, essentially kind of who's in the room while you're at the annual conference, who will you be presenting to, so you can have a better idea of how to focus your proposals so that they're meeting the target audience that's at the conference. After I do that, I'll spend just a couple of seconds talking about knowledge domains and core competencies, and then target audiences, so that'll wrap kind of this piece together. Lori, if you want to go ahead and pop all of these graphs on the page, I'm going to run through these statistics relatively quickly, partly because you can go back and listen to it again. when you, after this, look at the recording after the webinar is done, or when you look at the PowerPoint presentation, you can go back and refer to this. But just to get a sense of the delegate demographics, the demographics of those campus-based delegates who attend the annual conference, about 55% of the population is female. That number is a little bit higher than it has been the last couple of years. Again, these data come specifically from Providence in this last 2017, but I'll talk a little bit about numbers that have changed over time, at least over the last 3 years. About 24%, or 1 out of 4 of the participants who are in the room are identify themselves as non-heterosexual, so gay, lesbian, bisexual, questioning, queer, about 24%, and then about 25% of the participants at the annual conference are of color. 8% of the folks who come to the annual conference are coming from institutions that are housed outside of the United States. A large proportion of them are coming from Canada, but we have a sizable number of participants who are coming from South Africa, the UK, Central and South America as well. If you look at the education level of our participants, this reflects kind of the educational level of the profession or of the membership as a whole. About 82% of the people who attend the annual conference have a master's plus. So a master's, something after a master's, a JD, MD, PhD, or EDD. So that we are a fairly high educated conference overall. When you look at the age range distribution, we are kind of evenly spaced. We've got a sizable number of folks who are in this 25 to 34-year-old range, and a sizable third that are about that 35 to 44. So almost half of the participants, or more than half of the participants at the conference, are 40 years or less. And then we have this number of participants who are more seasoned and are in the 45 to 64 range. Okay. Lori, can you do the next page? All right, so there are 2 charts on this page that I want to talk about, and I'm going to start out with the one on the left, which is the primary functional area. One of the questions we ask in registration as you register for the annual conference is to identify the primary functional area to which you identify, and you can choose residence life, business operations, or facilities, or I have responsibility for more than one. When you look at this bar chart on the left side of the page, you'll notice that about half of the participants at the annual conference identify themselves as somebody who has a primary functional responsibility around residence life. And then the other sizable proportion are more than one area, that 30%. And that largely reflects folks who are at the mid-level manager and senior housing officer level of the organization and have responsibility for multiple functional areas. The chart on the bar graph on the right page really talks about organizational level. What is your title? What is the category or level within the organization? You'll notice on the bottom in the purple and blue, about 41% of those folks are residence hall directors, or many of the titles that we use for residence hall directors, area coordinators, or assistant directors. When you look at the titles of those assistant directors in particular, this 41% really reflects folks who are focused on halls and focused on students. And then you go up to the top and you look at this sizable percentage. So 1 out of 4 people at the annual conference are an executive director, a senior housing officer, a vice president, or an associate vice president. So about 1 in 4 are at the more senior levels across the organization. Okay, we're going to transition to the next slide, which is really going to talk a little bit more about institution type. So this is this looks at the institution from which you come, from which our delegates come. About 15% of the institutions that come to the annual conference, or participants who come to the annual conference, are coming from institutions that are on the quarter system. This 3% other really reflects somebody who articulates having a year-round institution or a trimester system. About 68, almost 70% of our institutions are public, with 24% private and 8% religious. Most of our institutions from a polarity are coming from urban or suburban areas, so the more populated parts of the country. Bed capacity is something I would encourage you to think a lot about as you're putting your proposals together. Almost 21% of our participants have less than 2,000 beds, and about half of our, or 46%, almost half of our participants are 4,000 beds or less. One of the things that the program committee has articulated in the program assistance guide is a desire to have programming specifically geared towards smaller campuses. So I would encourage you, as you think about your proposals, to think about this distribution of bed size or bed capacity as you're putting your program sections and your proposals together. About 3% of our delegates are coming from HBCU institutions, and that's actually the number of institutions, if I'm reading that number 32 being reading that accurately. And then about 22% of our institutions are coming from land-grant institutions. So those last three slides is a really quick pass about the kind of people who are in the room, from what kind of institutions and perspective and positionalities do they come from, so you have a better sense of how to focus your program for the people who are in the room. Next, I want to spend just a couple of seconds talking about two categories that we're gonna ask you to respond to on the program proposals. Laura, you want to advance? The first one, and you can go ahead and put this whole slide up. Thank you. You know, many of you will recognize this document, the core competency document. In 2012, we began a process of establishing our body of knowledge, and we created 12 knowledge domains that really define the scope of understanding of housing and residence life. Those 12 knowledge domains really reflect those things that are unique to housing and that you don't have to experience in other parts of higher education or other parts of student affairs. A really good example of that is assignments. Occupancy management is something that is very specific to housing, and the skill set around occupancy management is important for housing, and it's less important for somebody, say, in student activities. One of the things that we have done over the last, and really this has been a 2-year project that's kind of taking its step forward this year, is really talking about core content areas. So while there are a number of things within housing and residence life that are unique to our profession, there are some other areas that are equally important that go across the student affairs profession. An example of that is marketing. Marketing is not defined as one of the core competencies or one of the knowledge domains that's unique to housing, because student affairs as a whole has to have some skill sets around marketing. We found it challenging for our professionals to identify program sessions that met their needs outside of the knowledge domains. So one of the things we've done, and Laura, if you want to go ahead to the next slide. One of the things we've done is we've made this a little bit more complicated in one respect, but at the same time, it will help us and help our participants of the conference figure out what they want to do and what kinds of sessions they need to be interested in attending. If you look at this page, the items that are in light blue are those original 12 knowledge domains. For some of those knowledge domains, so evaluation and planning in the first column, there are a whole bunch of different subsets of content within evaluation and planning. We've identified those subdomains so that you can say, this session really is about policy. This session really is about strategic planning. And you can differentiate within the categories of evaluation and planning. One place where that becomes really important is resident education. The knowledge domains kind of lumped everything around resident education except for student behavior in one broad knowledge domain. So if you search for resident education on the mobile app, you would see all of these broad range of individual education sessions, some of which you may be interested in, some of which may not be something that you're directly looking for. We identified these subdomains to help tailor or clarify specifically what some of your sessions, what the sessions or content is about. So are you academic initiatives within that broader resident education umbrella? Are you something that's around hall directors and that hall director role? Is it around student development and student development theory? So you've got some additional options this year. The last group in green, so equity and inclusion, ethics, foundations, leadership, those are categories that are important to us as a field that we share with other areas in student affairs, and we share with other professions that work on college campuses. Now this list, and one of the reasons we're showing you this list, is as you identify your program proposal, we are going to ask you to identify which major category on this page does your program best fit under. So it becomes important to really think about, if you're going to submit a proposal in resident education, are you in one of these areas? Am I academic initiatives? Am I RA training? And to identify the correct program. Where this becomes really important is when participants pull up the mobile app and when they pull up the conference guide and they're looking for sessions that they want to attend, they'll be able to find sessions in their interest area a little more easily. So it becomes important to make sure your session is targeted with the right content area, core content area. Okay, let's go to the next slide. While this slide is kind of generating itself and running the graphics, I want to, one of the things that I've seen over the last several years as we look at individual educational sessions and their reviews. So we have an opportunity to review everybody's reviews kind of holistically to look for themes and trends across those evaluations. One of the things that program sessions often get dinged about is that the session content was above what I was looking for, so it was over my head, or it was below what I was looking for. One way to make sure that that the participants in your room are at the level that you think they are and that you're presenting to the level of the participants in the room is to make sure that you identify the correct target audience. Within the association and our learning curriculum, one of the phrases and concepts that we're beginning to socialize a great deal is around career phases. So we've identified 5 different career phases in housing and residence life. So paraprofessionals, so those are really our undergraduate participants, new professionals in the first 0 to 3 years, advancing professionals, which are in that 3 to 7 year mark, and then mid-level professionals, which really is kind of after that 8th year, but it also tends to be people who have responsibility for more than one functional area. For the purposes of the annual conference, one of the things we've done is identified seasoned mid-level managers. So those are folks who have been at the mid-level position for a number of years versus emerging mid-level, so they're just beginning their career path at the mid-level. And then finally, in that senior leadership, which would be executive directors, senior housing officers, associate vice presidents, kind of all of that at the senior level. As you think about putting your program proposal together, it becomes important to think about which target audience are you really targeting? Where are you focusing the content of your presentation? Is it appropriate for new professional or is it appropriate for SHO? If you can give participants the cue to what level your presentation is most appropriate for, then those people will be more likely, that level will be more likely to come into the room and their expectations are going to be met. If I walk into a room expecting something to be at mid-level professional level and you're really presenting it at the new professional level, I'm going to be pretty disappointed because I've been a professional for a number of years and my understanding of this particular topic I've generated over a lifetime of experiences. So this is one of the things that I would encourage you to be really focused on as you put your proposals together. All right, so I just did that with like 2 breaths. Lori, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Billy. So I am the staff liaison to the program committee. So I do a lot of work behind the scenes with sort of like the nitty-gritty details of how the submittal system works. But in doing that, I actually see all of the proposals in one way or another at one time. So I wanted to kind of go through some things about the system, but first I want to talk a little bit about, Billy just spent some time talking about, your proposal is accepted, you're in the room, making sure that your proposal is at the level it needs to be for the audience in the room. I want to talk a little bit about how you get your proposal to the point where you're in the room. So I've listed for you here the scoring criteria. This is how we score our programs. And so kind of what the process is that all of the programs go through a very sort of intense and robust scoring procedure through several rounds by our reviewers, and they use this criteria. So I just wanted to show that to you to give you an idea of what the criteria was. I wanted to also talk a little bit about, so we've talked about what makes, a good proposal. I wanted to actually show you an example of a good proposal. This was actually an example that I pulled that actually scored very, very highly last year, and I want to go through several points about it and talk about why that would be. One of the first things about your proposal is going to be your title. And I did want to mention also that the title of the proposal is, so it needs to be 70 characters. So when I say 70 characters, it's not 70 words, or that includes spaces, dashes, dots, hashtags, quotations, everything that you put in there. So that's something important to remember. I think it's always good when a title is descriptive. It doesn't necessarily need to be catchy, but clever is always good. I think it's, when someone's reading a title, if the title kind of gives us an idea of exactly what the proposal is going to be about, That's always good. The description of the proposal, so you can see this one here, actually is, and I think we have 250 characters in this field. So the description is more about, I mean, obviously it describes the program. It's more about, eventually this is what the audience is going to read. So if your program gets accepted, the title and description, these are the two things that when it's in the mobile app, this is what people are going to be seeing. So when you're writing your description, you want to think of it a little bit more like that. Now, learning objectives, this is something that I mentioned earlier that, we have a committee and it goes through a, really robust review process. Learning objectives are something that those reviewers use to try to figure out, okay, this is what I said I'm going to do. These are my objectives. Now, everything else that I describe in this proposal should be supporting these learning objectives. A lot of times people skip learning objectives, but you shouldn't skip learning objectives. These are actually really, really important. They're not anything that, should your proposal get accepted, this isn't something that goes in the mobile app. Nobody sees this but the committee, but these are very, very important. So I know that you probably can't see this, and I copied the whole outline in here, not because I thought that we should sit here and read it, but I wanted to mention it because it's also something that gets skipped a lot. It's something that I see a lot when I read comments from reviewers. People say, oh, this seemed like it was really engaging or unique, but it had no outline. And one of the most important things about the outline is, first of all, it has no character limit. I'm not suggesting that you should write 7 pages on it. But here is your chance to describe, when I showed you the learning objectives earlier, how you're actually going to achieve those. And another thing that's really important about the outline is sometimes we get many proposals that are very similar in nature. They may have similar titles, similar topics, and the outline is one of the things that the committee uses or reviewers use to try and figure out what makes this one different from the 4 other proposals that I just read on P3. So this is your chance to describe how yours is going to be different. What are you actually going to do in that 50 minutes or 30 minutes if it's a quick take, or in that roundtable? And I don't know if you can see or not because I know it's pretty small, but this was a really good example because you can see sort of at the end of some of the sentences, they'll say, oops, I didn't mean to do that. They'll say 10 minutes. So this person, actually, whoever submitted this, took the time to say, I'm going to spend 5 minutes on this, and I'm going to spend 10 minutes talking about creating your show. And I'm going to spend, 20 minutes going through examples, and then I'm going to spend 15 minutes on, questions and answers, and then I'm going to do a quick quiz. And so the more detailed you can get, the more I think the reviewers can really see this is well thought out. This is not something, that, is going to be sort of, put together, 5 minutes before the presentation goes on. Like this is actually really, concrete and solid. So just wanted to stress that the outline is really, really important. So I would definitely spend some time putting some work into that. I wanted to also show some of the reviewer comments. So this is what people actually said about this particular proposal. And I'm not going to sit here and read all of these to you, but again, we will have this recorded so you can go through and look at the recording and you can actually read the comments. But if you read the comments, obviously the committee, the reviewers who read this, and we usually have anywhere between, I think, 5 and 7 reviewers on each proposal. So, obviously they were impressed by this proposal and it did get accepted. So I just wanted to share that with you. And then just, a quick rationale on just a quick summary. I mean, I described some reasons why this was an example of a good proposal, but the topic is relevant. A lot of times I'll see in comments people saying, this is something we need. We need this. So obviously the topic, struck a note with the reviewers as identifying a need. Again, the title is descriptive of what the presentation is going to be about. Even without reading the description, if I read the title, I can tell. One thing that we want to stress too is not making things campus specific. So, we tend to like to see things that could be applied in a more broader sense and not things that are just specific to one campus. I mentioned before that the outline is very detailed, what's going to happen in the session, and supports the learning objectives. And then, of course, that it meets the defined criteria. Not necessarily that it meets every single criteria, but that it hits a preponderance of them on the level that it needs to. And overall, this one is very obviously well thought out and thorough. I did also want to spend some time, I did mention that I spent some time sort of behind the scenes working with actual, mechanics on how proposals get submitted. So I wanted to just take some time to go over a few things that sometimes are sticking points or problem areas. Sometimes I know it's that last week before the proposals are due, or it's the last night and you're trying to get it through, and that's when problems seem to happen. So I thought maybe if I spent a few minutes talking about that, maybe we could avoid some of the problems. But if it happens, you know that you can always call the central office or email the central office. During that last week when proposals are being submitted, we always know that we spend extra time helping people get through that. So I'm going to actually move my screen over. The first thing I wanted to show you is how to actually find where you submit a proposal. So there's a couple different ways that you can do that. One is, I know that we send out links. If you get our Connections newsletter, there's always a link in there saying, reminding you proposals are due. Click this link to submit. It'll take you right to the submittal page. You will have to log in. So if you've forgotten your ACUHO-I password credentials, now's a good time to maybe practice logging in and make sure you remember those. And if for some reason you can't remember them, you can always use the reset password function, or you can always call the central office and we'll help you there. So you can either link to it right from our Connections newsletter or from our homepage. There's a couple of different ways you can do this. One, probably the easiest way, is if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see a little blog article here about the call for programs. If you click that, and hopefully my screen share is keeping up and you're able to see the pages, you'll see a link here that says learn more and submit a proposal. So if you click on that, that will bring you to this link that says submit your proposal. Another way to find it would be to go to, and I'm going to go ahead and log in first, and then we'll go ahead and log in and I'll run through it. You can log in right from the home page. And you can go to educational events and go to annual conference and exposition. And if you go down to programs, you should be able to find submit your proposal. So there's a couple different ways to find it, but you will need to log in. So when you log in, this page will come up. And you will simply go through the process of entering your information. Obviously, here's where you enter the title. I mentioned before that it's 70 characters, and the description is actually 500 characters. I wanted to point out one of the sticking points is entering presenters. You can enter 3 presenters, including yourself. So it's actually yourself and 2 other presenters. So one thing that happens a lot, and I actually do it myself, is I go right to this box and try to type in a name when actually you need to actually use this search box first is the best way to do it. Otherwise, you end up making duplicate records or you can't find the names and it just doesn't work. So we're going to pick on Marcus and put his name in there, and hopefully it will come up. It'll search and it'll find a match eventually. Okay, so it should come up and find a match. It should appear in this box down here. It might just be a little bit slow because I'm doing this over a webinar, but it should populate, and you should be able to click on his name and it would populate the presenter boxes. So I just wanted to point out, unfortunately, it's making me look like I'm lying, but it will work, and you should use this box instead of typing in here. This is where you would enter your learning objectives. There's also a character limit on the learning objectives. There's a link here for the assistance guide, which actually, if you read the assistance, it'll just open up a Word document. It actually outlines a lot of the things that we're covering in our presentation today. Here's where the categories are listed. So this is where you would select whether it's a 50-minute, 30-minute quick take, corporate connections panel, and we also are soliciting for our pre-conferences that Ray mentioned earlier. So this would be a place where you can select those as well. The outline that I mentioned mentioned can go in this page. You can also use this editor to sort of format your outline with some, bolding and underlining and bullets if you need to. The target audience that Billy went over with us earlier, and also the knowledge domains are all listed here. AV requests, I did want to talk about that a little bit too. I want to mention if you're submitting a roundtable proposal, there's no AV in the roundtable rooms. It is simply it's meant for discussion. So it'll be, a room, and I think the capacity is about 20 people, and there's actually a circle of chairs. So there's no AV in those rooms. Every room comes with an LCD projector and screen. You can request flip chart and markers. All the roundtable rooms come with flip chart and markers. You can request computer audio or no AV. And then you can either save as a draft, or you can hit next and actually submit the proposal. And a page will come up, and I don't have anything in here, but a page will come up and you can confirm your information, and it'll actually submit your proposal. Saving a draft, I did want to point out too, when you save a draft, you can always go back to your draft, edit it, and submit it. A lot of times people have trouble finding drafts, but it should be, when you're logged in, it should be on your profile page. So you should be able to find it there. But you can always call us if you have problems finding the draft or getting anything submitted. So I didn't want to take too long going over these system issues, so I'm going to go ahead and switch back to the presentation and go over to quick takes. So I'm going to hand it over to Marcus.
Thank you, Lori. I appreciate it, and great job with your overview of submitting programs. My name is Marcus Silver. I'm currently an assistant director at University of Central Florida. My role on the committee is I oversee the administration aspect for the programs, which is making sure all of our reviewers are slotted, working with our review coordinators to get their programs submitted, reviewed, and evaluated. During our mid-year, making sure all the programs are slotted. And during the conference, ensuring that we have moderators for all of our program sessions. So it's very heavy in administration, but you get an opportunity to get to know all the reviewers, the review coordinators, and working diligently on the committee. Talk to you a little about quick takes. These are just like they're described, quick takes. They're very quick sessions. They're 30-minute sessions. They're usually held with no AV. Handouts are typically provided by the presenters. For example, we had a session last year on advising. They're usually, you get about 20 to 30 people attending the programs, so handouts are provided. It is a very quick and fast-paced session. As you are describing, talking about your program, some people will have questions, there'll be discussions, so the 30 minutes flies by. You always want to leave an ample time for questions and answers. When we're thinking of what to submit for quick takes, we think of what programs have been submitted, but what programs can you tackle in 30 minutes to your peers and having a constructive conversation, whether that be advising, whether that be alcohol and drug policies on your campus that have been updated, something that can be effective, that can be informative, that can be 30 minutes in your session. And if you have any further questions about quick takes, please let me know. You can go to the next session. Christine, you're up.
Thanks, Marcus. My name is Christine Winja, and I am the Associate Director for Learning and Development at the University of Florida, and I am the Chair-elect for the Program Committee. And so I wanted to cover roundtables a little bit. Roundtables are an opportunity to really be facilitated conversations. So it's not a presentation, it is really just a topic that then the participants in the room can discuss. The room setup typically, and we'll ask for this year as well, chairs are set up in a circle to facilitate that conversation. As Lori indicated, technology is not provided in these rooms, but there is a flip chart and markers that are provided just in case folks want to take notes and provide those to the participants later. The attendance is limited to 25 participants. That's the number of chairs that are in the room, and I will say that in the past We have had more than that attend the sessions, and they kind of sit on the outside, but these rooms are smaller, and the idea, again, is for it to be a discussion. Topics could be kind of wellness, engaging a specific population of students, best practices of a topic, or hot topics often end up in the roundtable discussion. So there are some that we see every year, like that new professional kind of roundtable, and then there's some that are brand new each year. Again, it is a great opportunity to share what you're doing, but also if there's a topic that you really want to have a vibrant conversation about, to be able to give folks ideas, that's a great way to do it.
So this is Ray Gasser again. Wanted to give you some pointers on putting forward the best possible program submission that you possibly can. Both Lori and Billy have highlighted some different things, and I'll probably reiterate some of those points. But the first thing is clearly define what needs to be said about your submission is that you clearly align it with a target audience. We're looking for those categories, those check boxes on the program proposal that aligns with what you write about the program. So what you want to make sure is that your content is consistent with the audience that is intended for. The second part of that, in terms of keying into topic areas, is that we're looking for diverse-based programs. And so think really about those core content areas. There are some content areas that we don't get as many submissions in. And so if you really hone in on areas where you haven't seen as much programming in the past at ACUHO-I, that might be an area where your program might stand out a little bit stronger than in areas where we see lots of programs in the same area. We would encourage you to make your presentation unique. Oftentimes we read lots of proposals on certain topics. A lot of schools will present each year a facilities program around some new construction that they built. And if it's typical, just explain that you built 500 new beds on your campus, and we have 10 different submissions from 10 different schools about new construction, it's hard to differentiate those. So try to think about ways of doing your presentation that kind of presents some unique perspective. We would encourage you, as Lori said, to make sure that you have a well-developed outline. Oftentimes people just put almost like a bullet list rather than putting some depth to their outline. We encourage you to kind of put some depth to it so we understand exactly where your program will take us. We would also encourage, while it is it's a blind process from our perspective of review, we would really encourage you to make sure that you have multiple perspectives from multiple institutions. And so oftentimes your proposal can describe that you may have both a small school, small liberal arts school, and a large public research institution describing your program content. So meaning present something that has more than just your institution's name on it, because that will reach more audience members, more people will be attracted to the program, and you have a better chance of getting accepted. Provide data and outcomes that support your program. So certainly if you've just initiated a new program or new process at your institution, but have no data to support that this is really a trendy thing to do, or that it helps student success, or that it's led to some sort of outcome related to staff satisfaction or whatnot, it's really helpful when you have data that supports what you're putting forward. Obviously not every program will have that, but those that do, and you can kind of highlight that in the description and the proposal, those stand out, again, stronger than the rest. The final piece in terms of a tip and trick that to prepare for is just think about those timely issues right now. What is trending in housing? what are some of the best practices out there. So even if you have something really great at your institution, consider asking other institutions what they're doing and whether or not what you're doing is actually trending, or it's actually you're kind of last one on the boat in terms of bringing that perspective to your institution. So think about those timely issues. What's going on right now? Some of our pre-conference sessions around assessment, residential curriculum, and First Amendment controversial speakers are certainly some of those kind of timely issues, those topics that people are very interested in knowing more about. But there's other ones out there, and I'd encourage you to think about that when you're putting together that program proposal.
So I think I get to be the one to invite everybody to explore Denver. If you have not been to Denver in the last 5 years or so, it has turned into, not that it never was, but it is an incredible convention center and downtown space. We have a large portion of the convention center. So you'll notice the Blue Bear. Go to the Blue Bear and follow the hallway back, and you'll begin to see ACUHO-I and the annual conference. So hopefully you're looking forward to joining us in Colorado. The other thing I would remind you is that the week prior to the annual conference, we host a study tour for folks for outside the United States, the Professional Standards Institute and STARS College. We will begin Saturday morning with a slew of incredibly strong pre-conference proposals, and we will continue to have new and interesting innovations through Tuesday night. So begin to make your plans and join us in Denver.
All right, thank you so much, Billy, and also Ray, Christine, and Marcus for spending time with us, sharing your knowledge. And I don't see any questions just yet popped up. So while we're going to kind of give folks a minute to maybe type in some questions, I did want to remind you also that we are recording this, and that we'll be providing a link afterwards so that you'll be able to share that with any colleagues who may have missed the presentation. We'll be sending that out. In the meantime, too, if after the presentation, if you think of any questions, please feel free to call or email us at the central office. We'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have. And just one reminder, too, I know that we said this in the beginning, but the call for programs does close. I think it's like 11:59 p.m. on Tuesday, December 5th. So just wanted to remind you of that. And I don't see any questions. So I think that could wrap it up for today, unless anyone has any concluding comments they want to make before we wrap up. Hearing none. All right. So very good. Well, thank you again for joining us, and I hope everyone has a great afternoon. Thank you, everyone.